that would be real good for him. But
So we're going to be setting up over here. I don't know if you want to get a side view for your camera.
maybe so.
That should be a good angle there.
Okay. What are we working on today?
So today we're going to be working external rotation of the shoulder from this abducted position, horizontal abduction, if you will.
Okay.
And we're also going to be teaching the scapula to stay in place while we're doing that. So we're first going to start with our scapular cars.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, scapular cars.
So with all the videos that you have, we've basically thrown a lot at your joints,
Yeah.
right? The idea is, especially, you know, when I see someone once a week, is for them to gather as much information as they can to hone in on what they feel is the most important part.
Yep.
And, you know, when you're working that most important area, you know, the next day, the options are endless because I give you a lot of information, right?
Yeah.
So for me personally, when I look at your hips and your shoulders, they're equally as important to me. And when you're doing these things, you know, to try to come as close to what we're doing here as possible, but also thinking about if it's an axial rotation, which is what we're trying to improve with scapula kind of thought process, in the sense of like my scapula needs to stay in place whenever I'm doing these axials. Note that you can do these from different positions.
Okay.
And you should, right? So if I'm working external rotation of my shoulder, in this position, obviously, my scapula is trying to stay down toward my pockets. The same thing would happen here, right? So I'm still working axial rotation of my shoulder. My scapula is still trying to stay down in my pockets, right? And then if I wanted to, I can actually work that from this position. Scapula is down toward my pockets. I'm going axial rotation. So when we work that axial rotation from all of these different positions, we get deeper into the capsule and a lot more information as we go. So keep in mind that, you know, when you're doing scapula depression with external rotation in this position, the same thing could happen the next day from a very different position, right?
Okay.
But we're still talking to that shoulder
Same
capsule.
spot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you though about like the glenohumeral joint versus like the conjunction, I guess they're really the same, of the scapula and the collarbone. Is it feels to me like this one, yeah, comes forward, but it sits better. This one, I just constantly am having to sort of remind myself to lengthen the collarbone, drop the shoulder blade, and it gets very confused in here about like what is elevated, what is dropped, what is pulled back, and I will start to like overdo some part of the motion or try to muscle it into place, and then I'll start getting that numbness and stuff. Yeah, and you know, again, it's like it plays into, you know, well, where is my rib cage? Is my rib cage underneath my shoulder blade to help support it? So that, I would say overall those things are improving just with the breathing and the work we've done already. But that's still a big one for me, is that this is, it sneaks up and forward, and then I start having these, yeah, so this is perfect.
Yeah, and one thing I always tell people is that, you know, everything from clothing to accessories play a role in how those tissues rise and fall. I remember Katie talking about varying your carry.
Yes.
Right? And that concept with clothing, with any type of basket,
Purses, baskets,
right?
yeah.
Your body will, or rather your brain will tend to carry that in the same arm. Even if you do remember to switch, your brain is always like 5 to 1, right?
Yeah.
Wherever it feels most comfortable, that's where you carry it. So all of these things kind of contribute to where the tissues sit. Now, when someone becomes really aware in an FRC kind of mind frame, it can be a tendency to overthink those things. So the constant like attention to it is like, oh, I keep driving my shoulder back. I always talk about, you know, the position of your tissues are due to, you know, the overall information of your mechanism, right?
Right.
And sometimes, you know, in combating the position, it's not so much us continuing to say, oh, my shoulder's forward, I'm gonna drive it back, right? It's more so saying, you know, how many different things can I change in my mechanism so that I don't really have to think about it as often so much as it just happens.
Yeah.
So thinking about that, number one. And then also kind of being compassionate with your body, right? Because the more we try to force it and the more we try to engage, a lot of times the tissues are like, no, screw you, this is what I do, right? So just trying to apply the therapy in the sense, and then really noticing and naming when the shoulder rises, when it's doing this and why, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot to pay attention to that, but we can
It
find
is.
ourselves really crazy if we're doing it all the time.
Well, and I had like this morning talking to Beth and her husband, it's just this idea of like, the brain knows one way, the brain is greedy, doesn't want to give up a lot of space to learn something new, right? I get all that. And I'm sort of trying to nudge it in the right direction and not overpower it, but that's kind of what I do. Like, I think a lot of people do who are like, just go where you're supposed to be and stay there. But it's, I guess the thing I'm wondering, the question I have maybe as much for myself as for you is like, not being sure exactly where right is still. Like sometimes I'll feel like, okay, well that seems right where it is right now, but that's like so much more external rotation than like I can find or keep.
Yeah.
And so it's like, is that really right?
So I think it's different with every person.
Right.
The accountant that sits at his desk for 12 hours is going to find a different neutral, if you will.
Right.
And while the assumption that, this particular posture is ideal and this one isn't, for the accountant, that posture is ideal, right?
Right.
So, I mean, when viewing a person from person to person, and like you're telling me you have neuropathy going on sometimes, I think that sometimes in forcing the joint where you want it to be versus where it is, sometimes those pinchy places can happen and your body starts telling you, stop messing with me. So changing position overall is going to come with therapy.
Yeah.
And the more frequent the therapy and the more intentful it is, the better it's going to be. And little by little, that position will start to change on its own, fractions of a millimeter at a time.
Yeah.
But we definitely got to focus on the therapy itself.
Yeah.
And then, outside of the therapy, the mechanism, and how many different ways we can change that mechanism.
Yeah. It's the same. It's good to hear that. It's the same message that I get everywhere, which is your brain knows this way. We just have to introduce it to all these other ways, and then it has the intelligence to choose a good way.
Yeah. There was a guy, his name is Amir something or other, but he's an FRC practitioner too, and he always kind of reverberates Spina's message about, ideal posture. And he does it in a way that can piss people off. But for me, I just say that, your ideal posture is being dictated by your tissues right now.
Right.
And, if that posture that you're in right now is creating neuropathy or creating pain, then the therapy is what's going to help it. But not thinking of the ideal posture as that person who stands up straight.
Right.
For me personally, like being from a fighter background, I always try to present myself with this proud chest, and it's kind of, this mindset of intimidation, if you will, right?
Right.
Anytime somebody's watching you, you kind of look like you're capable, right? And this right here is not capable,
right?
So I think that in that vein, I created this extension, right?
Yeah.
This holding it of my gut, so we start to create this position that we think is ideal, but we kind of create detriment with trying to force ourselves into these positions, whatever they may be.
Right.
So just making note of where my body is going to be enough, because then the therapy can actually start to recreate your position.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Patience is virtue, especially with ourselves. It's like the hardest possible thing to do.
It is.
So we're going to start off with your scapular cars.
Okay.
Yeah, we can
Here or here?
You know what? We can fix our hands right against the wall, just outside of shoulder width. Let's do it this way. I'm gonna have to clean these mirrors again.
Sorry.
No, it's cool.
All right.
Just outside of shoulder width here, it's a little bit wider.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good there.
And I can lean?
You can, just a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Elbow pits try to stay up as best they can.
Okay.
And we're gonna try to keep the shoulders down as we retract. And then elevate, protract, and depress. Retract, elevate, protract, and depress. Good. Keep that motion going slow and steady. Good. Anytime those elbows want to bend, try and keep them absolutely straight. Good. Abs stay tight. One more. And reverse it. Slow and steady. Three more. One more. Good. Any tension or discomfort in the neck as that's going on? Okay, good. Sweet. Let's go for our humeral cars.
Okay.
Good. Keep those abs tight. Fight that rotation. Three more. Last two here. One more. Switching sides. Last one here. Good. And we're going to go for some cervical cars next. Two more for each leg. So now we're going to fix ourselves into position for this external rotation. I'm going to grab a stick from you here.
Okay.
The center block is for your rib cage. So this one here, I'll show you. And what I'm going to do is formulate just a little bit of a crunch before I attach myself. I'm going to try to keep at least 20% muscle radiation there. The stick is going to go into the corner and my elbow is going to be right on top.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to do is unlock my grip and just get as much external rotation as I can without coming into extension here. And then I'm going to grip the pole tight. This free hand can be against the ground. I always recommend trying to get as far out with that free hand as you can so that straightened arm can create some muscle radiation into the ground.
Okay.
And then once we're here, we're just going to try to feel as much stretch as we can. And that sometimes will require us to crunch just a little bit further to put ourselves in a little bit more external rotation.
Okay, and head is just ramped.
Yeah, so head is trying to stay as neutral as it can.
Okay. Okay. Alright.
Yep, lift the rib cage off for a moment and just give me as much tension in the abdominals as you can and then reattach. Yes. So the next thing is the scapula here wants to feel gentle depression. Good. Feeling a good degree of stretch in that external rotation?
I'm still kind of trying to get the shoulder blade away enough that I feel a little bit of pinch. It's pretty light, but I think that it's that shoulder blade kind of creeping up.
Yeah. So right now, in this position, it looks like you're a little bit extended here. So I want you to give me just a little more crunch, and that'll add to the stretch feeling in that shoulder.
Yeah, there we go. Better.
Good. Holding position here. Breathe. Good. Just make sure none of your breath makes you extend.
So tell me a little bit about your Saturday class.
Saturday class is pretty much exactly like my Friday class.
But it's online.
It's online.
Okay.
Yeah. So usually because Friday, I mean, when I'm doing it with you guys and then I teach some private FRC sessions online at night, I'm usually fried the next day.
I bet.
So Saturday morning is usually something that helps me feel a little bit better from the previous day.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you just teach it from your house?
Yep. I have a little room in the back that is basically my studio space and a bunch of lighting that helps to make it look good on camera.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
if you can send me a link about that,
Sure.
I would probably join in at least some Saturdays, and I would certainly give that information to others.
Cool. Sounds good. One more minute here. Trying your best to breathe maximally. 45 seconds. Seconds. So we know that this shoulder in general and the scapula as well tend to really go for it and jump when we produce maximal force. So I want you to make sure that when you do start your force production, you're going to do it at about 5%. Yeah. And it's going to start with your grip. Deep breath in. Exhale, bearing down to about 30. And you're trying to force the stick into the corner by about 5%. Super gentle, super gentle. Good. Tone it down. 5, 4, 3, 2. Generate tension in the opposite direction. breath in. Exhale and bear down. Good. Generating tension downward at about 5%. Five, four, three, two, dial down the tension and immediately engage the opposite direction. 5, 4, 3, 2, dial the tension down, stay in place. We have one more round here. 3, 2, 1, deep breath in. Exhale, bear down. 5% pressure into the corner. 3, 2, 1, dial it down, engage the opposite direction. 4, 3, 2, dial the tension down. You can release your grip first, hold onto the stick. So pretty intense. And so what I noticed is as soon as you start to produce pressure, even though we're trying to go at 5%, you're going really, really hard, right? And that really hard, sends a lot of information into that shoulder capsule. And because it needs a little bit of relief, it starts to hike up, right? And you did well to keep the scapula depressing, but the elbow itself was like, I want to go up. And then the shoulder itself said, I'm a little more comfortable moving away from this position, further away from this horizontal abduction. So when you're doing this again, I would make note of, number one, a pressure change, right? And maybe if we backed you up, your body might feel more comfortable producing a little less tension with a fingerprint. Because it's very difficult to produce 100% with your fingerprints.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll even tell people you can irradiate with a fist,
Oh, wow.
but you have to pressurize with your thumb.
Okay.
Very difficult to produce 100% with a thumbprint,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And I can still keep my grip, but there's definitely not going to be 100%, 80%, 60% coming from pushing down
Can
on
I
your
just
thumb.
try
You
that
absolutely
position for a
can.
second?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, everything you just said about what's happening sounds true. It's just,
So make a fist first.
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Underneath.
And I'm actually gonna change this angle for now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can feel how that turns
Yeah.
a little more into anywhere between 5 and 20%,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and just, actually, it's not an ideal position for my head, but I
Well,
just saw
you can
that,
always
right?
put blocks. You can always put blocks underneath your forehead as well, just to have a place for your head to rest so that your neck doesn't work
It's
hard.
just seeing this, though. It's like I see exactly what the strategy is, and this feels better, but this is what my body says
Yeah.
it wants to do.
Exactly. So the idea is to try to create a minimal amount of tension first so that that shoulder blade agrees with the situation, and also that the humeral head doesn't try to move away, because the position that we're trying to adjust is exactly that, this kind of full horizontal abduction. And if you look at me from the side, it's almost like my elbow is behind
Yep,
that point and
Yep.
still externally rotated.
yep,
And little by little, if I put too much pressure on, either my shoulder's gonna wanna do this to say, let's change this position, the capsule's not liking this, right? Or it's gonna go
Yeah.
I got this,
Right.
right? When really it's just changed the position.
Right.
So when you did move up, what I was looking for is the scapula moving out of the way of what we wanted to do? And it did get to stay down. The elbow itself moved up, the shoulder itself moved back, and I just said, you know what? Let's produce as much irradiation as we can from this position first. And the more that shoulder knows the position, the more strict we can be.
Yeah.
But just remember that when you're doing it on your own, it's probably better to use the fingertips or the thumb.
Less pressure.
Yeah, your body will be able to produce less pressure. It's kind of like tricking your body a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's keep the position, but we're just going to lower the amount of tension, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And in the worst case scenario, I always tell people, imagine you're trying to smash a bug, right? And not crush the floor, right? And if you're smashing a bug, that little bit of tension is enough to get information, and especially initial information.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's try the opposite side.
Alright, so
Here. And we'll use that same principle of fingerprint or thumbprint.
okay.
This is enough for me.
Yeah, actually, I can just grab up like a blanket to put.
Yeah.
That was the other thing. It's like my bony elbows and things don't like that hard surface very much. Okay. So that.
Look back here just a little bit further. Stick's gonna be right about here. Yeah, that should be good. Yep.
That.
Yep, keeping the thumb hooked on there. Tight abs, slight flexion of the ribcage and then attachment.
Look about right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay.
How does it feel so far at the setup?
Awkward, but
Okay.
okay.
Hold position, 2 minutes here. Breathing. Every exhale reinforces the tension of the abdominals. And the tension should stay at about 30%. And for anybody who's kind of like playing a guessing game, is what is 30%? Just think, am I going to my max? If I am going to my max, I want to reduce that to be as little as about a third. And if you're falling anywhere beneath or above that, that's okay.
Yeah, I still really have a hard time
Yeah.
with the rheostat of percentages.
One thing that's going to produce a little bit of a stricter position here is this arm coming up further. Yup.
Feels better in the shoulder too. Voila.
One more minute here. About 30 seconds. Ten seconds. Three, two, one. Deep breath in. Exhale to about 30 and drive at about 5%. Five, 4, 3, 2, dial it down, opposite direction. 5, 4, 3, 2, dial that tension down and stay in position. I'm going to shut this music off. It's kind of combating the next two.
Yeah, dueling music.
Yeah. They win.
Yeah.
Deep breath in. Exhale and bear down 30. And 5% into the thumb. Five, 4, 3, 2, dial it down and opposite direction. 1, dial it down and stay in position. Breathing. 5, 4, 3, 2, deep breath in. Exhale, bear down to about 40%. And pressure into the thumb at about 10. Just a little bit greater than the last one. 5, 4, 3, 2, dial it down and opposite direction. 5, 4, 3, 2, dial it down and relax the thumb like on a stick.
So much easier. It's, it's crazy. Like, I'm comfortable, I can do it, but it's still this one I'm trying to manage the whole time. It's like, this arm's getting tired, now it's getting cold, now I'm like, yeah.
The blocks are an excellent way to kind of omit all those extra feelings. I mean, ultimately, like you'll see it at my place, I have a dead ball where I use for my torso. The blocks are just where I place my elbows, because
Me being in this position, usually my minimum is about 5 pails and rails.
Okay.
So in the process of doing that, especially if I work out the next day, my upper body gets extremely exhausted. So
Yeah.
I tend to lean on my torso more. And then these blocks, let's say, my triceps are exhausted. I'll put the block underneath my elbow. If I feel my shoulder is popping up, then I'll try to find a position that just omits my shoulder altogether.
So just a lot of blocking and bolstering.
blocking, bolstering, I mean, whatever you could possibly do to take out all those factors that we really have to pay attention to.
Right.
Because the more we have to pay attention to, the more it becomes this multi-whack-a-mole rather than just one or two things that we're paying attention to.
Yeah.
So trying our best to get those positions as possible.
Okay.
Oftentimes too, on your back can be another way. So if you're on your back, the idea is to try and keep this tension, because on your back, your body will more than likely try to go into extension without this blocking surface. So I always tell people, if you have heavy balls at home, you can place that on your stomach, and anytime you feel your tension at your stomach dissipate, try and get tension underneath that ball.
And then I oftentimes will have people who have dumbbells. So I'll put their hand underneath the dumbbell handle, and then I'll tell them to have a towel that's rolled up to take up any space. And then we're here with the ball on your tummy, the dumbbell underneath or over your hand, and you would pressurize the dumbbell, right? Obviously the dumbbell is in the way, and the towel is taking up the space. So anytime you pressurize, it's like, and then if you go too hard, you'll actually lift the dumbbell,
Right, okay.
So that's also a good way to maintain 5%
that.
or 10%.
What would you say about like bolstering yourself into a slight post tilt even to help keep would that be
Yeah.
too much to do or?
Well, I think the bolstering in general, like, we want to make sure that there's some way to keep tension. So if we do bolster ourselves into a slight pelvic tilt, if that becomes relaxed, you
yeah,
know,
okay.
it's like
That's a good point.
then it's not good. But if it keeps you tense, then yeah, you know,
Okay.
anything that helps muscle radiation go, and anything that omits the possibility of going into extension is a good idea. But the moment that we bolster and that loses tension, it kind of does the work for us in a sense.
Right, it's an orthotic.
We want to get the happy medium of that, you know,
Okay.
so that we still keep that tension going.
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
So let's go on to all fours here, and we're going to go into another scapula motion.
Okay.
So here we got gravity working with us into retraction. And we're also going to do a 3 to 1 focus. So 3 seconds in depression, 1 second in elevation. Yep. And then right back into depression. So let's stay with the scapula retracted. Try to feel the shoulder blades pinch the entire time. Yep. Elevate for 1, depress for 3, 2, 1. Elevate for 1, depress for 3, 2, 1. Keep that going.
I want you to remember how this drill feels, because protraction is pretty easy for you.
Yeah.
Good. Make note, anytime you feel those elbow pits trying to turn in, we're going to try to forcefully turn them out. And that's going to stop a certain amount of upward rotation of the scapula from happening. Good. Feel that constant shoulder blades pinching even when you depress. 3, 2, 1. Up for 1. Down for 3. 2, 1. Up for 1. Down for 3. 2, 1. Keep that going. We'll go for about another minute here. Good. Remember, as you elevate, keep trying to feel that axial rotation, external rotating. 25 seconds. Good. Don't lose the feeling of the shoulder blades pinching. 5, 3, 2, 1. Good. So what were you feeling in that position as you elevated and depressed?
A lot of fatigue. The action of externally rotating is the part that I lose most quickly.
Okay.
And in watching my shadow, being able to see that I could get my left shoulder blade to come down and pinch far more easily, I kept seeing more,
Pop.
yeah, on the right. So I was able to stay out of any of the pinching, which was great.
Awesome.
But yeah, just a poor connection of my brain to being able to find full external rotation, and then a lot of weakness to keep it.
Well, what I saw, one thing is, a better connection than your previous demonstrations on the wall. And this is technically harder to do, especially with your weight on the shoulder. So what I expected to see was what I saw on the wall. which is when you elevate this kind of internal rotation,
Yeah.
and that brings more upward rotation of the scapula. But as soon as I let you know, keep that external rotation, the effort there actually minimize the amount of upward rotation. So there's hope for you.
Yeah, it's
And-
getting better.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, and the more you practice it, the sharper it's going to get. So just formulating those connections, is going to be improved with that intent. And what I also saw is that as you elevate, that retraction kind of dialed down a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
it's harder for me to keep it up there.
Yeah, and that also causes a little bit more of a wing of upward rotation, right?
Yeah,
So anytime I do elevate, I want to be able to still feel that retraction, right? And
Yeah.
this is actually a partial cars practice, right? I'm just staying in retraction and staying in retraction, staying in retraction, staying in retraction. So while the axial rotation definitely looked like it was staying online, which is awesome, the retraction tendency tends to,
I lose that.
yeah, and this is all information, right?
Yeah.
Because whenever you're elevating with the intent of not protracting, this is happening,
Yeah.
right? When you're not paying attention to it. So the more we pay attention to it, the sharper it'll get. Now, one thing that we're going to start to do, and I'll show you your next exercise, is we're going to put some external load. Is this the right one? No, I think this is the right one here. So, number one, when I first start this action, right, to be closer to the elbows is going to make this easier.
Okay.
Further away from the elbows, harder,
Yeah.
right? You're putting more load on external rotation. What I want to do is I want to retract, stay retracted, and then as I move away, then protract, retract, and pull back,
Okay.
right? This time I'm trying to stay away from that elevation tendency, right? This is kind of working our protraction to retraction
But
with this bias of continuously externally rotating. When I do go forward, I'm still trying to externally rotate, so I don't want this to happen,
okay.
right?
Okay.
Give it a shot.
Alrighty.
And this is just going to play into reformulating how the glenohumeral rhythm performs when you're actually moving the shoulder.
Okay, so start here.
Yep, so pull it back against your tummy.
Okay.
Good. Feel your shoulder blades pinch. And as you're going straight out in front, try and keep the shoulder blade pinch until the arms are straight. Then protract intentionally, retract, and pull the shoulders back. Now you see how the elevation slightly happened?
Yes.
You're trying to stop the elevation from happening as best you can.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're kind of playing on this 3-to-1 principle here as well, where we're trying to just protract for that second and bring it right back into retraction.
Such a Bermuda Triangle back there.
Getting better. These guys go to your pockets. Good. And that elevation can happen too when you're trying to drive too far into retraction. So just feel them come close together. Better. Slow and steady back. That one was money.
Getting a really good burn.
We won't burn it within reason. We don't want an inferno.
Yeah, I have like one more left, but it's getting pretty tired
How
in
about 2
there.
more?
2? I'll try. The burn is real.
Last one.
Okay.
Good. Rest.
So from the first rep to the last rep, big difference, yeah? There wasn't the gross elevation happening, there was a slight little jump, and then you tried your best to control it. Again, repetition is what's gonna make that better.
Okay.
And this external load, I mean, should change, right?
Right.
If this feels like by the 8th repetition, this feels like, wow, this was very close to 80%, 70%, maybe using something that's even lighter. I think Katie's bands probably are a good idea.
Yeah, I have some of those at home.
And in this sense, I would go with the handles hanging down through your grip, because then that'll force you to externally rotate a little bit. And this is going to be a lot lighter.
I probably have one of these that's super light too.
Yeah.
Really, really
Great idea.
light tension.
Yep.
Okay. Can I ask, so I've practiced a couple of these things at home, and I just, if these are good things to keep practicing, then I will, but if not, so I was doing some of just these, and holding and coming down, and then sort of here, and retracting, but I'm not sure if I'm just not able to stabilize well enough and I can't see, so I don't know.
It is a good exercise. I would do those in a couple different ways. Number one is specific to the open position, right? The first thing I would do is bolster you. This might be a little aggressive.
Like bolster my hips.
No, so pushing you into just a little bit of flexion before the start.
Yeah.
So that when you are going overhead, you barely are leaving the ground, and you'll know where you are.
Okay.
Because the first thing I saw when you did this was
Extension.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered about that. So when I do it at home, I actually bolster
Towel.
right here,
Awesome.
bolster my hips so that my pubic bone is all the way down and I'm trying to reach. So I do usually have myself bolstered.
Awesome.
But yes, I'm aware that I always want to, it's rib cage movements, just spinal movements, so much easier for me than getting my shoulder blades to do what I want them to.
And then the second thing I would suggest is always trying to be aware of when your elbows are going higher than your hands. So especially when we get tired, and this is another reason why I love cameras, right? Even when I'm not recording for someone, I'm recording. And a lot of times, especially when I'm exhausted, this is my position here.
Yeah, internal rotation.
Yeah, so we
It
want
looks
to make
like
sure.
external rotation, but it's not.
Well, external rotation for some.
Right.
For me personally, like, this is where I should be. Tight abs.
Yeah,
Right.
that's good motion.
So far, so good.
Yeah, okay. So, okay.
Yeah, and even up against the wall, you can do it, right? So if I place my chest against the wall, but I try to remove my belly button
Yeah,
and keep that tension.
and then drive the elbows.
Yep, I would even say, think about slowly pulling your shoulders toward each other behind, but try to keep your elbows low and your hands high. The moment your chest comes off the mirror, you know you're extending.
Oh,
And even if those elbows skate across the surface, that's okay, because you still have external rotation.
that feels way better. I mean, it doesn't, now I don't feel that slide into pinching. That's a good, I like that. I mean, it's not super.
Just remember, as long as your elbows are lower than your hands, you are in external rotation. And if you try to go into your overhead position, try to keep your elbows connected. Good.
That's funny, I can feel that right one's laggy.
And belly button tries to come away from the mirror, even if it is a fraction of an inch.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just a couple different adjustments. Really good exercise though. And maybe one day I'm actually going into this overhead position. Maybe the next day I'm not, right? Maybe I can take some super duper lightweight. I'm gonna pound here. And I'll get my position against the ground. Obviously my belly button's trying to stay away from the floor. And I got my elbows tucked into my rack position, I like to call it, as close to my rib cage as I can. And all I'm trying to do is externally rotate, hold, 3, 2, 1, slowly back to the ground. This is gonna be working that axial rotation, but it's gonna be working from a completely adducted position.
Okay.
Really close to the body.
Yep.
So still working that capsule, right? And this is still very, very challenging as an isometric exercise.
So that's a pound.
This is a pound.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that seems like that would be. Oh yeah, that's heavier than you think, right? A single pound.
Good. So remember, before you start, and you're going to choose your position, whether if it's horizontal abduction and you're trying to reach your elbows away from your body into a T. Yep. And if it feels easy to hold this position with your elbows on the ground and externally rotate, you can always block your elbows with a block underneath to be a little bit higher.
Okay.
And your belly button's trying to create, or rather your belly's trying to create tension so your belly button feels like it's trying to reach off the ground. You'll decide how long you want to hold that isometric and then slowly and gently back to the ground. I always start at about 3 to 5 second holds.
Do my shoulders look even? They feel wildly different.
So right now the shoulders look relatively even, but they do seem to start moving away from the ground. So that might be that the spine is going to a little bit of extension, or that might be that you're retracting a little bit more to try to get more height. Always feel like this elbow is moving away from the opposite elbow. Yep. And a little bit of gentle depression here. Gentle, yep. And slowly back to the ground.
Okay, I can feel that. That's a little better. Wow, that's tiring.
Yeah. See, now you're definitely getting a little more extension.
Oh my gosh, that is so tiring.
So you can feel also that when you do fully externally rotate in this position without extending, your serratus kind of fires off and really pushes the scapula, right? Drives the scapula toward the ribcage, and subscapularis actually attaches the scapula to the ribcage a lot better. So there's a lot of different benefit to actually isometrically holding in this position, but you always want to make sure that extension, the extension doesn't happen, and just trying to get as much of that external rotation as you can. So a little bit of lift off from the chest here. And dial it down.
Yeah, I feel like this finding the effort through here is just, it's very elusive because this just wants to take over.
Immediately,
Mm-hmm.
but it's coming. It's getting
Yeah, a little
better. It's coming online bit by bit. But that's, I think, why I started practicing these again, because those are like old things from like my Pilates training. I was like, oh yeah, you know, like it's really weak back there.
Everything has overlap, right?
Yeah.
I find that Pilates instructors especially have a really good insight as to how to load through those ranges of motion. And then when you apply the principle of FRC to those Pilates positions, it becomes really, really useful.
Yeah, it's interesting. So some of that stuff's been sort of cycling back through my brain a little bit, and it's just the rib cage is just always leaking out into wanting to do.
And it'll get better.
Yeah.
It will definitely get better.
Yeah.
And just remember also that if you feel like that starts to happen, then maybe blocking or toweling underneath the elbows to get just a little bit further, it might be a good idea.
Okay.
Because your pecs are actually trying to make some room. It's like trickery almost, right? So when I'm here, in order for me to get more external rotation, it's almost like,
I see what you're saying.
right? So the body is very tricky with its compensatory action there. And in order to get more external rotation, it's almost like it wants to get a little more adducted away from this position. So
Okay.
just being mindful of that, and maybe the external rotation won't happen as high
Right.
with my elbows back here. Maybe it'll just be that.
Right. But
Right.
that's really a better
That's really going to
place for
speak
my-
to the capsule
Yeah.
better. Yeah, for sure.
So, I guess it feels like it's the glenohumeral joint, but it's also the shoulder blade itself. So that's still a little too short here, a little bit not strong enough here and here, right? So,
Well, I think that the tendency to elevate is just something that your body's used to. So the scapula is, playing its role in the glenohumeral joint itself, right?
yeah,
Anytime you're trying to externally rotate, it's like, we don't have what you're trying to give us. So I'm gonna make room, right? Now we can accomplish what you're trying to give us. When really it should be more so that, you're trying to make this position a little more true without getting this position,
yeah,
right? So this is creating space on the outside, whereas we're trying to create space on the inside. And this position right here is gonna reveal less external rotation,
right,
right?
okay,
So whereas I can go here and get that external rotation, right? If I go here, it becomes even more because I've just created space elsewhere,
okay.
right?
I just keep trying to understand it better because I don't have a good grasp on it.
Yeah. So right now the elbow's coming forward, lessen that external rotation a bit. Good. I'm going to stay right behind you here. Good. Give me external rotation now. Good. Right back to the neutral position. Give me external rotation now. That's what we got.
Oh, that's
Right?
not very
That's
much.
the truth. But that's the truth right there.
Yeah,
Right? So when
okay.
we start pails and rails from that true position, we're going to get less compensatory action.
Gotcha.
The scapula is also going to benefit from depressing in this position and learning that when you do externally rotate, I don't need to do this.
Right.
This is what we want.
Yeah.
And then little by little, fractions of a millimeter begin to happen. You'll have more external rotation because the capsule itself is allowing that external rotation.
Okay.
When that elevation happens, it's like the capsule's free of getting more, right? It's like, we don't need to get more. We got elevation, which gives us more, but that capsule's gonna get more information the stricter we are.
So, okay, so I see all these, ways on Stina and all the other practitioners, and there's a lot of holding a band or being, something that doesn't stretch and being in these positions. When I try that, if I've been playing around with some of that, but it's like, this is exactly what happens. So clearly then I need more blocking. Is that
Yeah, that's where it starts.
probably the,
Yeah, that's where it starts. So, I mean, we definitely want to try it without blocking, right? To see where the shoulder goes and see what's true. But the blocking, especially at the beginning for me, is always 3-to-1, right? 3 times you're blocking, the 1 day you're not blocking. Get familiar with what you do have, get familiar with the control without those external sources of information.
Okay.
Right? But it's necessary for sure.
Yeah, it's still just this, I don't have a good internal map of what is happening. I feel the need to visualize it all the time because I don't feel like the sensory information I get is interpreting well, or,
Yeah, no.
you know, I guess, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, practice makes progress.
Yeah.
That's it.
Exactly, that's
Lots
it.
and lots of practice.
Lots of practice, and that's where I've kind of been
It's
lacking this
the
last
people
couple
that I see that actually see it in the shortest period of time are obsessed with it.
weeks.
I mean, I'm talking about like they're cooking dinner and they're sending me a video of them with a pan in their hand cooking dinner while they're internally rotating doing pails and rails, right?
That's impressive.
Or, you know, washing dishes with their feet into an ankle stretch, right? And doing pails and rails as they wash dishes, right?
Okay.
For me personally, when you walk into my place, you're gonna see there's a half dome in the kitchen, there's sticks in the living room, in the bedroom, and in my studio. There's all sorts of props, and it's just because when I find a moment, I am literally obsessing about it, you know?
Yeah.
And
That's what Katie always talks about too, right?
Yeah.
You know, finding that 2 minutes, that 30 seconds, that whatever.
whatever you got,
Yeah.
you know?
My house is the same, by the way. I have it the same, and I guess really a lot of the energy I've been putting into all of this past, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks has just been kind of from here to here, and just focusing a lot on my feet and ankles, and I'm finding a lot of benefit up in my
Super
hip.
valuable.
So, you know,
Super valuable.
yeah.
And
But-
that's another thing, like with the time and energy that we have, we just prioritize it, right? And sometimes I get more information to my ankle than I do to my shoulder. Sometimes I get more information to my T-spine and my lumbar than I do to everything else. And it's just because what I'm prioritizing at that moment.
Right.
And the time that I do have to obsess, that I could play a round robin, right?
Yeah.
But again, you know, you do the best with the time that you have.
Yeah, and I'm giving myself solace in that it's like, well, it's a closed system, so anything I do here still benefits
Yeah.
this a little.
Yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously the more specific you can get with your information, the better.
Right.
But especially when you're working into the feet, I mean, it's a doorway,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it just was something I knew that I could focus on given the amount of mental energy I had this last month or so. So it was good. But
Yeah.
I feel like this is sort of starting to creep up the priority list again. So
Yeah.
this is good.
And also, like, on those days when you feel like you're in places that, you know, let's say you're teaching a class, you know, for me, a lot of times teaching classes online, especially, I go somewhere. I know exactly what I'm saying and what I'm doing and what to cue. And, you know, a lot of times you'll see me in my class doing this, and I'll be walking around, you know, whether I'm online or here, right? And I'm actually doing something while I'm talking.
Right.
So ultimately, you know, the task that you can do, even when you're doing something else, is just another layer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds right.
It's a lot of work,
It is a lot of work. It's
but
good
you
work.
are worth it.
It's what I keep telling myself. It's like, you know, if I want to move better at 68 than I am at 58, then I gotta put in the work.
That's it.